Hello everyone. Today we will presenting our project on the topic cultural suppression and preservation in the Soviet era. For this project, we visited the Museum of Armed Forces of Kazakhstan to explore how Soviet ideology influenced culture, identity, and historical memory in Kazakhstan. During the Soviet period, the government attempted to create a unified Soviet identity across all republics. Russian language, Soviet values, and communist ideology became dominant in education, media, and public life. As a result, many national traditions and cultural expressions became less visible. However, despite political and ideological pressure, many elements of Kazakh culture survived through traditions, music, clothing, and cultural memory passed from generation to generation. In this presentation, we will analyze several artifacts from the museum and explain how they reflect both cultural suppression and cultural preservation during and after the Soviet era.
During the Soviet era, Kazakhstan became part of a centralized political and cultural system controlled by Moscow. One of the goals of Soviet policy was to strengthen Soviet identity above national identities. Russian language became dominant in schools, administration, and media, while many local traditions and religious practices received less public attention. The Soviet government also controlled newspapers, education, art, and historical narratives through censorship and propaganda. These policies influenced both material culture, such as clothing and public symbols, and spiritual culture, including music, traditions, and cultural values. After Kazakhstan gained independence in 1991, the country began restoring national symbols, traditions, language, and historical identity.
This artifact is a traditional Kazakh shapan. The shapan is an important part of Kazakh material culture and reflects national traditions, identity, and historical continuity. During the Soviet period, traditional ethnic clothing was rarely promoted in official Soviet culture because the government emphasized a common Soviet identity instead of ethnic distinctions. However, families and communities continued preserving traditional clothing during celebrations and cultural events. This artifact demonstrates how material culture became a way of protecting national identity despite cultural assimilation policies.
One of the most meaningful artifacts we observed was the dombra and the image of a Kazakh musician. The dombra is a symbol of Kazakh spiritual culture, oral tradition, and collective memory. During the Soviet era, traditional Kazakh museum continued preserving stories, historical memory, and national values. Also, Soviet authorities promoted officially approved Soviet culture. Traditional music remains important in family and community life. As a result, music became an indirect form of cultural preservation that helped maintain Kazakh identity across generations. This artifact shows that spiritual culture survived even under ideological pressure.
After the collapse of the Soviet Union, Kazakhstan declared independence on December 16, 1991. This marked the end of Soviet political and ideological control and the beginning of a new stage of national development. One of the most important steps after independence was the creation of new national symbols. On June 4, 1991, Kazakhstan officially adopted its national flag and coat of arms. The blue flag symbolizes peace, unity, and the sky, while the golden eagle represents freedom and independence. Traditional Kazakh ornament on the flag reflects national heritage and cultural identity. The coat of arms includes the shanrak, which symbolizes home, continuity, and unity of the people. The winged horses represent strength, freedom, and future progress. These symbols became important not only politically but also culturally. After many decades of Soviet influence, Kazakhstan began actively promoting the Kazakh language, traditional culture, historical memory, and national identity. This period demonstrates that independence was not only the creation of the new state but also the restoration of cultural identity and heritage.
By analyzing these artifacts, we learned that Soviet policies influenced many aspects of cultural life in Kazakhstan through ideology, censorship, media control, and the promotion of Soviet identity. At the same time, the artifacts also show that culture was never completely erased. Material culture, such as traditional clothing and historical objects, helps to preserve visible elements of heritage. Spiritual culture, including music, oral traditions, and collective memory, preserved values and identity across generations. The museum sources demonstrate that cultural preservation often happens quietly through everyday traditions, family practices, and artistic expression. These artifacts help us better understand how people maintained cultural identity despite political pressure and historical change.
In conclusion, our visit to the museum allowed us to examine how the Soviet system influenced cultural life in Kazakhstan. The artifacts we analyzed showed that political ideology affected education, media, and public expression, but national traditions and values were still maintained within communities and everyday life. We also observed how independence opened opportunities for Kazakhstan to reintroduce its own symbols, traditions, and historical perspectives on a larger scale. Overall, this project demonstrated that museums are important for preserving collective memory and helping future generations understand the connection between history, culture, and national identity. Thank you for your attention.